Let me tell you a story. You're standing in a wheat field in the San Joaquin Valley in 1880. It's hot, dusty, and about 20 of your neighbors are riding toward a little farmhouse to talk things out with a U.S. Marshal. 30 seconds later, 7 men are on the ground. Newspapers will call it a massacre. The railroad will call it law and order. A novelist will turn it into a myth. And a pretty normal-looking patch of ground near Hanford, California, will end up being the bloodiest and most confusing gunfights in the whole Western story. This is the Mussel Slough Tragedy. On May 11th, 1880, late in the morning, just northwest from where Hanford is now, settlers are at this big picnic in town. Like food, speeches, kids running around. It's half protest rally and half community potluck. Everybody's waiting for the main event, a fiery ex-California Supreme Court justice named David S. Terry. He's supposed to give this big anti-railroad speech and light the place on fire. But he never shows. So now you've got this worked up crowd, no main speaker, and way too much time to complain about the Southern Pacific Railroad. Then the rumor hits. Somebody says, the marshal's out there serving eviction papers. He's kicking people off their land, and he's got railroad men with him. That's it. Spark, powder keg, they meet each other. About 20 settlers grab their guns and saddle up. They say they're just going to go reason with them. But, come on. They ride out towards the farm of a man named Henry Brewer, where the marshal's buggy was last seen. The wheat is tall, the land is flat, and from a distance, all you can really see is dust and heat. Already at Brewer's place are 4 men. U.S. Marshal Alonzo Poole, a Southern Pacific land agent named William Clark, and 2 local settlers who had sided with the railroad, Mills Hart and Walter J. Crow. Now these guys are not strangers from out of town. Hart and Crow are neighbors. They used to be just like everybody else out there. What makes them different now is one choice. They paid the railroad's price. They bought their land directly from Southern Pacific and took official title. To the people in the Settlers League, that's betrayal with, capital B. Poole is there to serve papers. Hart and Crow are there to help him take over the land the railroad says it owns, land that some of these settlers still think of as theirs. Now the dust cloud rolls in, horses pull up, and the 20 riders from the picnic surround the buggy. They've got guns, they've all got opinions, and old grudges come back fast. For a few minutes, it's just a bunch of shouting, stop the evictions, wait for the courts, wait, I'm a federal order, I'm just doing my job. Nobody has a plan for what happens if talking doesn't work. Then somebody reaches for a gun. One shot goes off, and within about half a minute, 6 men are down in that wheat. A 7th will soon die from his injuries a little bit after. The big oak tree shading Brewer's porch gets a new nickname, Tragedy Oak. And so that's where they lay the bodies so that the neighbors can all see what had just happened. So now you got 7 dead, dozens of families wrecked, and nobody's going to agree on why it happened. Jump back about 15 years. In the 1860s, the U.S. government is obsessed with railroads. Big ones, cross-country, north-south, turn empty, map into money kind of railroads. To make that happen, you don't just hand out cash, you hand out land. Picture a giant checkerboard laid across the San Joaquin Valley. Every other square goes to the railroad, if they build the track. The Southern Pacific changes its route and cuts inland. And now this line runs right through what will become Mussel Slough. So you've got settlers who think that they're on a normal land and a railroad that suddenly has legal claim to big chunks of it. And the company didn't just kick them off, they leaned into it. First, they sent out brochures and agents saying, come to the San Joaquin Valley, bring your family, turn this dry plain into farms. When the time comes, you can buy your land for $2.50 an acre and upwards. And the value of your improvements, your house, your fences, your fields, it won't raise the price. That won't raise the price part is the landmine. People believe it. Why wouldn't they? It's printed. It's official looking. It's repeated over and over. They move in. They dig canals. They pull water out of the King's River with ditches and sweat. They turn this place from a semi-desert into prime wheat ground. They're the reason this land became valuable. Then the railroad finishes the line, checks the boxes on its federal contract, and decides it's time to cash out. Land agents start naming prices, not $2.50, more like $8, $10, $35. The railroad's pitch is, look around. The land's worth more now. You're connected to markets. This isn't scrubland anymore. Of course, the price is higher. And the settlers say, yeah, it's worth more because we made it worth more. You told us our improvements wouldn't jack up the price. We took you at your word. They feel played hard. Some of them just honestly grit their teeth and pay. They hate it, but they want to lock in on their farms. Others say, absolutely not, you lied, we ain't paying that, and we're not leaving. That second group decides to get organized. In 1878, the angry group becomes official, the Settlers League. Hundreds of people. At first, they go through all the respectable channels, right? The petitions, letters to Congress, appeals to the state legislature, even trying to reach the president. Every time they get in front of a judge, the answer is basically, legally, the railroad did what it's supposed to do. The land grant is valid. The title is theirs. So on paper, Southern Pacific is in the right, but that doesn't fix anything. The longer this drags on, the angrier people get. Rallies and speeches start to grow teeth. You start hearing about masked rioters at night, barns belonging to pro-railroad settlers suddenly burning. Fences are cut. Threats show up on doors and gates. At this point, it's not just farmers versus a big company. It's neighbors turning on neighbors. On one side, you have the people who feel like they're defending promises and the sweat that they've put into that land. On the other, you have settlers going, I hate this too, but I've got a family and a mortgage. I'm going to pay, get the legal title, and survive. That's the split. And all of that anger is about to land on one guy. The pitch to the settlers was simple. Come farm this land, and later you can buy it for about $2.50 an acre. That's the number a lot of people built their whole lives around. And then once the railroad was done and the valley was booming, the price jumps to $8, $10, $35 an acre. And that right there, that's the phrase that really set people off. Improvements won't raise the price. Settlers read that as, all the work you do building this place won't be used against you later. Walter J. Crowe is the lightning rod. Later retellings either turn him into a cartoon villain, the evil railroad gunman, or a poor guy caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But reality is a little bit more complicated than that. Crowe is a local. He's not imported muscle. He's a farmer. He knows the area. He knows the other settlers. He makes one big decision, right? He buys land directly from the Southern Pacific. From the company's point of view, they probably love him. That's how it's supposed to work. From the Settler League point of view, he's the guy who took their defeat and put his name on it. He buys some pieces tied to League men like Henry Brewer and William Braden, and that makes it personal. He also has another thing going for him, or against him, depending on which side you're standing. He's good with a gun. He hunts, he shoots. People know all of that about him. On the day of the fight, he's carrying a 10-gauge double-barrel shotgun loaded with buckshot. And it's not a prop, obviously. That's a stay-out-of-my-range kind of weapon, right? So when he rides out with Marshal Poole and Mills Hart that day, he's not just some extra. He's the neighbor who took the deal, the guy the league already hates, and the one man in that buggy you really don't want pointing a gun at you. Back at the picnic, you've got this crowd, fired up, no main speaker, and then someone runs in with, "The marshal's out there evicting people, Crow and Hart are with them," right? Around 20 league members get on their horses and go. They ride out under leaders like James Patterson and William Braden. Later on, these guys will say, "We just went out there to talk. We just wanted them to hold off until the last appeals were done." Maybe that's true, but they're not exactly riding out like a delegation from the Rotary Club. They're riding out armed. And when they reach Brewer's farm, Poole's buggy is there in the yard. Marshal Poole, Land Agent Clark, Mills Hart, Walter Crow. The league men fan out and surround the buggy. Some accounts say that they stay mostly on horseback. Others say that they're crowding in on foot. Either way, you've got a tight ring of armed men around 4 other armed men. And of course, the tension goes from polite argument to people yelling in each other's faces pretty quick. The settlers are saying, "Stop evictions, wait for the courts." Poole keeps saying, "I have federal court order. I'm not making this up." Then the side beef blows up. Hart and a league man named James Harris already have bad blood. Hart had supposedly called settlers sandloppers, basically calling them dirt-eating squatters. Now they're in each other's faces. Words turn into threats, threats turn into somebody drawing. Hart shoots Harris. Harris manages to shoot back. Hart goes down. That one exchange flips the whole scene from angry standoff to gunfight. Walter Crow swings his shotgun toward the cluster of settlers right in front of him. And of course, these guys are bunched up together. He pulls the trigger, and a 10 gauge loaded with buckshot at close range into a tight group. It's pretty brutal. Several men drop immediately. Others are hit and, they'll die later. Crow either reloads or changes weapons, witnesses disagree, and then he fires again. From Hart's first shot to silence is probably about 20, maybe 30 seconds. It's not a drawn-out battle. It's loud chaos, then bodies in the dirt. And when it's over, 5 league settlers are dead or dying. Another will die from complications. On the railroad side, Hart is dead. Crow is the only man on that side who did any real shooting. Now, Marshal Poole and William Clark, they don't fire any shots. They just get the hell out of there. Survivors carry the dead to Brewer's porch. The big oak tree in front of the house becomes Tragedy Oak. In under a minute, a land dispute turns into a massacre scene. When the dust settles, 5 league settlers die at or right after the gunfight. On the railroad-aligned side, Mills Hart is killed in the exchange of fire, and one more, which we'll get to in a little bit. 7 men in total. All of that over who really had claim to a few square miles of wheat fields. Now, Crow runs. He hides away from the farm, wounded or at least shaken, but he doesn't get that very far. About 1.5 miles away, near a clump of trees, someone shoots him in the back. Some people later say that they saw puffs of smoke in the trees and then saw Crow go down. But nobody is officially named for that shot. No trial, nor "we found the killer." Nothing. So now 7 men are dead. 5 league settlers, Mills Hart, the local settler who backed the railroad, Walter Crow, the neighbor turned symbol who killed most of the settlers and then got shot from behind. So you might think, all right, so now comes the big murder trial, right? Not really. The federal grand jury doesn't bother with Crow. He's dead. They don't bring murder charges over Hart or the settlers. Instead, they charge the league leaders with interfering with a U.S. Marshal. Not murder, not manslaughter. Basically, you got in the way of a federal officer. 17 settlers get indicted. 5 of them become the famous Mussel Slough Five. They're tried in San Francisco, found guilty, sentenced to 8 months in jail and a fine. 8 months. The jail in San Jose is so relaxed that some of their wives are actually allowed to live in rooms right next door. One of the jailer's daughters actually fell in love with William Braden, and they got married. When the Five came back to Hanford, they are greeted like rock stars. About 3,000 people show up, bands, speeches, the whole thing. To their supporters, they're political prisoners who stood up to a monster corporation. To the railroad defenders, they're the ringleaders who started a deadly mess and got off kind of easy. Either way, the message from the legal system is clear. The land grant stands. Southern Pacific keeps its title. On paper, everything is resolved. But in real life, the fuse is still burning. And if you want to know why Mussel Slough is still a thing, don't just look at the bullets. Look at the headlines. In 1880, a lot of big California newspapers hated the Southern Pacific. Not because they're best friends with the farmers, but because the railroad controls freight lines and squeezes city businesses. So when Mussel Slough happens, they have their villain ready. They lean into one version of the story. Pure innocent farmers, practically unarmed, gunned down by cold-blooded railroad jackboots. Do they talk much about the League's night rides, the barn burnings, the threats against the neighbors who bought from the railroad? Not really. Doesn't fit the script. The papers, friendly to the railroad, tell the complete opposite story. Settlers as illegal squatters, armed to the teeth, surrounding a U.S. Marshal executing a lawful court order. Same gunfight. Two completely different movies. And then a novelist makes sure that one of those movies becomes the official one in a lot of people's heads. In 1901, Frank Norris published a book called The Octopus, A Story of California. It's a novel. It's not trying to be a court transcript, but it's a big set piece. Farmers versus railroad, fatal showdown. It's very clearly based on Mussel Slough. Norris takes all the outrage people feel and cranks it up. He turns the railroad into a literal monster, a giant octopus strangling California. His farmers are more innocent. His railroad is more evil. The story is bigger, cleaner, and easier to plug into emotionally than the real thing. And it works. People all over the country read The Octopus and think, okay, that's how it was. California farmers good, railroads bad. End of story. Most of them never hear the words Mussel Slough. They just absorb that myth. The messy middle part gets blurred out. The railroad really did have legal title according to multiple courts. The settlers really did have a strong moral case based on what they'd been told, the work that they did. The League really was a mix of family farmers and speculators. And the violence really did go both ways. No one comes out of Mussel Slough looking spotless, but spotless is easier to sell. And so that's the story that sticks. The anger over all of this doesn't disappear. In the 1890s, Chris Evans and John Sontag start robbing Southern Pacific trains in California. They aren't pitching themselves as common crooks. They frame it as revenge against an unjust railroad, and plenty of people who still hate Southern Pacific nod along. Locals hide them. Locals hide them, feed them, and cheer when they make the papers. Meanwhile, people like reformer Henry George are using California land and railroad fights, including things like the Mussel Slough, as Exhibit A in their argument that giant land monopolies and corporations are warping the whole system. His ideas about taxing land values spread way beyond California. And then, in the early 1900s, you've got Theodore Roosevelt reading things like The Octopus and already leaning toward cracking down on big trusts and monopolies. So now this weird little land blow-up in Tulare County ends up feeding into a bigger national story about corporate power and how much control one company should have. All from a railroad deal gone bad in a wheat field. If you go out near Hanford today, you can pull over and see a simple marker by the road. It'll tell you in 1 or 2 lines that this is where Mussel Slough Tragedy happened, that 7 men died in a fight over land titles between settlers and the railroad. And some versions of that plaque over the years have even gotten little details wrong, The myth always edits the facts just a little bit. The big oak tree where they laid out the bodies, Tragedy Oak, stood there until about in the 1990s when a storm finally knocked it down. And a piece of that trunk ended up at a local school as part of a relic. Most people, they just drive past. The fields are still there. The land that people once literally killed and died over is just more farmland. But the questions underneath Mussel Slough are still very modern. What do you do when the law says one thing and your gut says that's not fair? What happens when a company technically keeps its contract but breaks what everybody thought the promise actually meant? And what do people do when they feel like they've used every proper channel? The courts, the politicians, petitions, and they still get steamrolled. In Mussel Slough, the answer was night rides, a gunfight that lasted less than a minute, a man shot in the back from the trees, some light prison time on technical charges, no real feeling that justice ever showed up for everybody. The railroad kept its land. Over time, the settlers or their families paid up, made deals, or moved away. The valley kept growing. But if you step back from that myth and look at what really happened, Mussel Slough is not a simple story about heroes and villains. It's a collision between two kinds of right. On one side, the legal right, land grants, contracts, court rulings. And on the other, moral right, promises made, years of work on the land, and a sense that the rules changed after the game started. You get that kind of tension building long enough in one place, it doesn't take much to make somebody pull a trigger. 7 men died in a wheat field believing they were in the right. And a quiet patch on the San Joaquin Valley became the place where California found out what happens when you build a railroad on promises and then forget the people who believed them. Ricky's Historical Tidbits is a show designed to teach you about events or people in history that textbooks either skip or only touch with a paragraph or two. And I know your time is valuable, so I keep every episode fairly short. Most are under 15 minutes, except for this one because that octopus was just too darn big to cut. If you found this interesting, I'm sure you know someone else who would. Please share it with them. And if you have some time, check out my other episodes. Subscribe on whatever platform you're on so you don't miss new ones. And just so you know, all episodes are available as video, article, or podcast.